aviation regulator to ask them to actually set shop in India. You want to service those fleet, you want to service those aircraft, but how do you do that if you do not have a facility in India? Pratt & Whitney has been asked, we don't know whether it will comply and do it.
I mean, see, it makes complete business sense for any engine maker to not transport every spare or transport back every faulty engine to its base location, which happens to be US for Pratt & Whitney. And for an aircraft carrier fleet so large as it operates in India across multiple airlines, I think it makes eminent sense for MRO, which is maintenance, repair and overhaul facilities, to be set up in India itself. Now, what are the issues that we have seen with Pratt & Whitney? I think obviously no surprise there. 50% of the GoFirst fleet before 2nd of May, when it filed for voluntary insolvency, was the faulty Pratt & Whitney engine linked fleet. So 26 out of 52 of GoFirst aircraft had to be grounded, and GoFirst had squarely put the blame on Pratt & Whitney and Pratt & Whitney alone to lead it to a point of insolvency, because it was able to operate only 50% of its fleet and hence just about 50% of revenue. Now, running an airline, obviously, as everybody knows, is a very, very expensive affair, because there are capital investments that need to be done, there are licenses to fly, pilots that come at expensive salaries, and of course this entire capex of aircraft, the airframe per se and engines separately, is the bulk of the cost. And for every time that you fly up in the air, even one empty seat is an opportunity loss for you. Now imagine not flying at all and keeping your 50% of your fleet grounded. That's about 180 passengers per aircraft at a time when it's grounded. And on an average, even if one aircraft is able to do about 10 sorties in a day, you know, you're talking about 1,800 passengers per aircraft unable to fly. Multiply that into 26, that is the kind of revenue loss that airlines face on account of engines being faulty. Now, DGCA has asked Pratt & Whitney to seriously consider setting up an MRO here in India, so that a future GoFirst sort of a catastrophe can be you know, avoided right before it you know, as the early signs of a making of a catastrophe emerge. Now, GoFirst is not alone in its battle against Pratt & Whitney. And GoFirst is now going to deal with a separate set of challenges that will just come to. But even IndiGo has about 50 aircraft right now which have Pratt & Whitney engines which are faulty. They need repair. They need urgent sort of, you know, overhauling and repair. So IndiGo, which is India's largest carrier, could also potentially fall into the same trap of Pratt & Whitney, unable to service the engines, in time, resulting to IndiGo keeping its fleet grounded. And IndiGo flies the largest number of Airbus A320 aircraft, which houses these Pratt & Whitney engines. So GoFirst, so GoFirst is just step one.
Right.
Whether it makes sense, whether Pratt & Whitney will want to comply or not, given all that has happened by virtue of NCLT putting GoFirst under moratorium, not letting Pratt & Whitney access its you know, its inventory of engines, and that is also something which may now further impact GoFirst more, because as per the Delhi High Court order, it seems now that even NCLT may have to amend the moratorium and let Pratt & Whitney and other lessors, for that matter, reclaim the grounded GoFirst fleet. So overall, the problem is fairly large in its manifest. At one level, of course, it makes business sense for an engine maker as large as Pratt & Whitney, which services a large enough fleet in a particular geography, to set up an MRO there. It is going to be, you know, cost effective for them. Hopefully, they will have to make initial investments to set up that MRO. But overall, it makes sense for them to be closer to their point of sale and point of repair and their clients, rather than being in this, you know, constant movement of parts or engines periodically. Now, secondly, I think it makes sense for the government, for DGCA, to put a little more, you know, heavy-handed sort of approach towards Pratt & Whitney, to make sure that IndiGo does not fall in the same trap as GoFirst did because of faulty engines. And parallelly, GoFirst sort of, you know, future is looking a little more bleak than earlier, if lessors are indeed permitted to reclaim their aircraft and reclaim all the inventory that is parked with GoFirst right now. So overall for the aviation space, it's mixed signals. Good, an MRO should be set up, but bad if an voluntary or involuntary bankruptcy moratorium has to be diluted by way of lessors getting their inventory back.
Any reasons why Pratt & Whitney will not set up an MRO?
I think cost would definitely be one major, consideration, if not a constraint. So there is capital investment required. Then, of course, there's the whole business climate. Now, what Pratt & Whitney has seen in the case of GoFirst, and if it sees that the Delhi High Court order prevails, and even for airlines which are already undergoing bankruptcy proceedings, which also includes Jet Airways, for example, it makes eminent sense then for an engine operator to maintain distance with an aviation market where the legal constraints make it difficult for them to do business in. So would they want to invest there? Perhaps not. But if they see that the Delhi High Court order does prevail and a moratorium gets diluted or lifted, then the overall doing business climate in India becomes a little more conducive to engine makers and, for that matter, all sorts of industries that want to make investments in India. So cost would be one, and the overall business climate is something that they will be considering. And I think only if the two make sense completely, given that there are large aircraft orders placed both by IndiGo as well as by Air India. Both of them have placed orders with Boeing and with Airbus. And we are also expecting by end of the year, if not earlier, even Akasa Air is likely to place 3-digit orders. So I think if the aviation pie is expanding at such a vast
it makes
pace,
business sense.
it makes sense to be closer to your clients as opposed to being in one more geography and dealing remotely, with day-to-day issues.